They were once close allies, partners in oil, partners in war, partners in a dangerous world. But something happened, a series of decisions, betrayals, and revolutions that turned this partnership into one of the most volatile geopolitical feuds of the modern era. This is the story of the United States and Iran, and it didn't have to end this way. Few relationships in modern geopolitics carry as much weight or as much tragedy as the one between the United States and the Islamic Republic of Iran. Today, the two nations have no diplomatic relations. They fight wars by proxy. They impose crippling sanctions. They exchange threats through press releases and state media. And yet it wasn't always this way. For decades, these two countries were partners, strategic allies, bound together by oil, Cold War fears, and billions of dollars in military cooperation. To understand how that partnership collapsed and why it still matters, we have to go back to 1953, to a prime minister, to a covert operation, and to a decision that would reshape the Middle East forever. Iran in the early 1950s was at a crossroads. The country sat atop one of the world's largest oil reserves, but that oil was controlled almost entirely by the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, a British firm. Iranian workers drilled the oil. British shareholders collected the profits. Into this volatile situation stepped Mohammad Mosaddegh, a democratically elected prime minister who was wildly popular with the Iranian people. His mission was simple: nationalize Iran's oil industry, take it back for Iran. In 1951, Mosaddegh followed through. He nationalized the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. Britain was furious. They imposed a global boycott on Iranian oil and turned to their American allies for help. Washington was reluctant at first, but then came the Cold War argument. What if Mossadegh's government collapses? What if Iran falls to the Soviets? What if communism spreads across the oil-rich Middle East? That argument won the day. In August 1953, the CIA, working alongside British intelligence, launched Operation Ajax. Through bribery, propaganda, and the orchestration of street mobs, they destabilized Mossadegh's government. Mosaddegh was overthrown, arrested, tried, and sentenced to house arrest for the rest of his life. The Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi was restored to power, now firmly in the pocket of the West. In Iran, the memory of 1953 never faded. The coup became the original wound the moment the United States chose oil and Cold War strategy over democracy. A betrayal that a future generation would not forget. With Mosaddegh gone and the Shah in power, U.S.-Iran relations entered a golden era, at least on the surface. Iran became one of America's most important allies in the Middle East. The Shah was pro-Western, anti-Soviet, and eager to modernize his country. He opened Iran's oil fields to Western companies, generating enormous wealth. Washington rewarded him generously. Billions of dollars in military hardware flowed into Iran: fighter jets, tanks, helicopters, warships. By the mid-1970s, Iran was the largest buyer of U.S. weapons in the world. Iran served as a crucial buffer state, its northern border pressed directly against the Soviet Union. American military planners saw Iran as a linchpin of regional security. The Shah also launched a sweeping modernization program, the White Revolution, which brought land reform, expanded education, and women's suffrage. Western journalists praised his vision. But beneath the glamour, something darker was festering. The Shah's secret police monitored, imprisoned, and tortured political opponents. Religious leaders, leftists, and nationalists were all targets. The CIA had helped train Savak in the minds of many Iranians. American fingerprints were everywhere. The gap between Iran's wealthy elite and its struggling poor grew wider every year. And in the mosques and markets, a growing resentment was building, not just against the Shah, but against his American backers. A revolution was coming, and almost no one in Washington saw it. By 1978, Iran was on fire. Millions of Iranians, united by very different grievances, took to the streets in protest. Religious conservatives, Marxist students, liberal nationalists, and impoverished workers all shared one demand: the Shah must go. The protests were relentless. The Shah's security forces fired into crowds. Hundreds died. Still, the people came back. The revolution's spiritual leader was Ayatollah Khomeini, a 76-year-old cleric who had spent years in exile, broadcasting fiery sermons on cassette tapes smuggled into Iran. He wasn't a politician, he was a prophet to his followers. Khomeini offered a simple, powerful message: Islam was the answer, the West was the enemy. The Shah was a puppet. Iran would reclaim its soul. On January 16, 1979, the Shah boarded a plane and left Iran, never to return. He died in exile the following year. On February 1, 1979, Khomeini landed in Tehran. The crowds were among the largest ever assembled in human history. Iran had a new master and a new identity. The Islamic Republic of Iran was born. and in its founding DNA was a fierce, uncompromising hostility toward the United States, the Great Satan, as Khomeini called it. Washington was stunned. The CIA had almost no warning. Their greatest Middle Eastern ally had vanished overnight. The worst was yet to come. November 4th, 1979, a date that shattered what little remained of U.S. Iran relations and sent shockwaves through American politics that are still felt today. A group of Iranian students stormed the U.S. Embassy in Tehran. They took 52 American diplomats and staff hostage. Their stated reason, the United States had allowed the deposed Shah to enter America for medical treatment. They demanded his return. Ayatollah Khomeini gave the students his blessing. The hostage crisis became official government policy. For 444 days, the hostages remained in captivity. They were interrogated, paraded on television, and used as political pawns. In America, the crisis consumed the national psyche. Yellow ribbons appeared on trees and car antennas across the country. Every night, the news ended with a running tally of the days in captivity. President Jimmy Carter tried diplomacy. He tried sanctions. He tried a daring military rescue mission, Operation Eagle Claw, which ended in catastrophic failure in the Iranian desert, killing 8 American servicemen and rescuing no one. The hostage crisis arguably cost Carter the 1980 presidential election. Ronald Reagan won in a landslide. In a final act of defiance, Iran released the hostages on January 20, 1981, the exact moment Ronald Reagan was sworn into office. A calculated humiliation of Carter. The hostage crisis didn't just damage relations between two countries, it created a permanent emotional wound in American public memory, a wound that shaped decades of U.S. foreign policy toward Iran. For years after the hostage crisis, the United States and Iran waged a Cold War of their own through proxy conflicts, terrorism accusations, and economic pressure. Then came a new flashpoint: nuclear weapons. Iran insisted its nuclear program was peaceful, designed only to generate electricity. The United States, Israel, and much of the West believed otherwise. They feared Iran was racing toward a bomb. Beginning in the early 2000s, the international community imposed increasingly severe sanctions on Iran. These sanctions targeted Iran's oil exports, its banking system, and its ability to trade on global markets. The Iranian economy and ordinary Iranian citizens suffered enormously. In 2015, after years of secret and public diplomacy, a landmark deal was reached: the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or JCPOA. Under the agreement, Iran dramatically limited its nuclear activities in exchange for sanctions relief. President Obama called it a historic step. Iran's President Hassan Rouhani saw it as proof that diplomacy could work. For a brief moment, the possibility of normalization seemed real. Then came 2018. President Donald Trump withdrew the United States from the deal, calling it the worst agreement ever negotiated. He reimposed sweeping sanctions and launched a campaign of what his administration called maximum pressure. Iran responded by gradually resuming its nuclear enrichment, reaching levels of uranium purity that alarmed international inspectors. The Biden administration attempted to revive the deal. Talks stalled. Iran kept enriching. Today, Iran is closer to nuclear weapons capability than at any point in its history. The window for diplomacy is narrowing. Beyond the nuclear standoff, the United States and Iran have spent decades fighting each other indirectly through a web of proxy conflicts that have reshaped the Middle East. Iran funds and arms Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, the Houthis in Yemen, and a constellation of Shia militias across Iraq and Syria. These groups project Iranian power, threaten Israel, and complicate American military operations throughout the region. American forces have repeatedly come under attack from Iranian-backed militias. In Iraq, in Syria, in the Red Sea, the United States has responded with airstrikes, sanctions, and covert operations. In January 2020, the Trump administration crossed a threshold few expected. A U.S. drone strike near Baghdad airport killed General Qasem Soleimani, the head of Iran's Quds Force, and one of the most powerful military figures in the Middle East. Iran mourned him as a national hero. Millions attended his funeral procession. Tehran vowed revenge. Days later, Iran launched ballistic missiles at U.S. military bases in Iraq, the largest Iranian military strike against American targets in history. Miraculously, no Americans were killed. The two nations stepped back from the brink, but the incident proved how easily this Cold War could turn hot. Meanwhile, inside Iran, popular discontent has grown. The 2022 death of Mahsa Amini, a young woman who died in the custody of Iran's morality police, triggered some of the largest protests the Islamic Republic had ever faced. Young Iranians flooded the streets, demanding change. The government cracked down brutally. The protests were suppressed, but the anger remained. So where does this leave us? 70 years of history. A CIA-backed coup, a revolution, 444 days of hostages, proxy wars, nuclear standoffs, and two nations that have spent more time as enemies than they ever did as friends. The relationship between the United States and Iran is not simply a diplomatic disagreement. It is a wound with layers: political, cultural, religious, and deeply personal for millions of people on both sides. Could relations ever improve? History offers small glimmers of hope. The 2015 nuclear deal proved that sustained diplomacy can produce results even between bitter adversaries. Back-channel conversations have happened before, they could happen again, but mistrust runs extraordinarily deep. Every attempt at engagement has faced sabotage from hardliners in Tehran who benefit from the siege mentality, and from political forces in Washington who see confrontation as the only language Iran understands. The question is whether the next generation, both American and Iranian, will be bound by the grievances of their grandparents, or whether they will find the courage to write a different chapter. History is not destiny, but it is a very heavy inheritance.